Hello, everybody. Welcome to Friday Live with me, Matthew Dashper-Hughes. It is my absolute pleasure and privilege this week to be joined by my friend, Mr. Anthony Taylor. Anthony is a owner of 359, a consultancy which specialises in helping middle managers to become mentally fit to be truly great leaders. He's an author of several books, including these two here. I'm sure we'll be talking about them, especially this one, which is his latest book, Mental Toughness Metaphors. He's a podcaster. In fact, I think it's fair to say that if I sat here listing all of his various accomplishments and his background, well, we'd take up the entirety of the half an hour that we've got together. So, Anthony, welcome.
Thank you, Matthew. It's too kind. Slight exaggeration on the half hour bit, but yeah, very kind. Thank you.
No, it's a genuine pleasure and privilege to see you. Frankly, it's good to be doing these things, just to have the excuse to have a chat, because I haven't seen you for blooming ages. It's really good to have you here.
I know. Well, since you moved away, it's been, and with lockdown, we haven't had a chance to catch up.
I know. We need to have a beer as soon as this thing's over. Anyway, sure. My potted history of you clearly isn't going to do you justice. So just in your own words, give us 60, 90 seconds. Just give us a bit of a flavour of what it is you do, how you add value to your clients, and the sorts of stuff you do.
Great. So typically I work with organizations when they're worried about how do we support our people, how do we get the best out of our people while looking after their well-being. And I work in the field around mental fitness, which is the intersection between three key things. One is around mental toughness and resilience. The second is around emotional intelligence, because that's as important, if not more important, perhaps, than IQ. And lastly, around mental health. We're really trying to change the story around that. It's very difficult to become a good leader or a good manager from a foundation of poor mental health. So those are the three key areas that really we look at. And that's really how we support organizations through development programs, coaching, speaking, and those kind of things as well.
Absolutely fantastic, which of course beautifully takes us into our main subject for today, which is of course mental toughness. What is it and why should you care? So I'm afraid I'm going to give you a little tiny taste of your own medicine here, because I've been listening to your new podcast, which, by the way, congratulations on it. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
And one thing I do want to be asking you at some point today is how are you getting these amazing guests? Because you've had some fabulous guests on. But, not that I haven't got a fabulous guest myself here, I should just hasten to add. But when it comes to mental fitness and mental toughness, what does that mean to you?
I think it's great. I'm going to pick up, because you said mental fitness and mental toughness there. So if you allow me to be a bit of a pedant for a minute. Mental toughness itself is a plastic personality trait. So it's something we all have. And it's how we respond mentally to stress, pressure, and challenge, irrespective of what's going on, irrespective of the prevailing circumstances. So we all have degrees of mental toughness. And that is what has become widely accepted as the best definition of mental toughness. There are lots of different definitions, like there are for resilience, but this is one that is used when we look at the 4 C's model of mental toughness, which I think we might talk about in a minute. And then mental fitness is a term, again, people have different things, but for me, it's coined about what I talked about earlier on, which is the intersection of those 3 key areas: mental toughness, emotional intelligence, and mental health. So hopefully that starts to give people a little bit of a clarity around what mental toughness is and what mental fitness is, if we're talking about that. In terms of why mental toughness is important, well, we all have it. And because it's how we respond to stress, pressure, and challenge mentally, it's really important. A lot of times people have a misconception about mental toughness. I find the term is quite a Marmite term, really polarizes people. Some people hate it. It's all that kind of the wrong image of sort of, biceps and balls and machoism and all the rest of it. And some people quite enjoy it. But it's important because it looks at how we think and how we respond to those things: stress, pressure, and challenge. So that's why it's really important.
Interesting. I thank you for making the distinction as well. I think that's a really important and useful distinction. And I must admit, it's one that I probably hadn't appreciated the subtleties on. And you made the point there that actually it's one of those terms, mental toughness, that perhaps has that that feeling of machismo and sort of pumping iron behind it. But it's not like that at all, is it? I mean, some of the guests that you've been interviewing on your podcast, I mean, they've if anything, they've expressed an incredible amount of humility, and I've been struck by their vulnerability, and that seems to be their comfort with vulnerability seems to be a key attribute here. And I don't know if that's a thing, if that's just me picking up on it.
No, I think you're absolutely right to pick up on that. I think it's very astute, but it is. Mental toughness is about how we feel comfortable in our own skin. So we look at mental toughness through, there's 4 areas we look at it. We look at one called control, which is around life control and emotional control. Then we have commitment, which is around goal orientation and goal achievement. So that kind of stickability piece. Do we get knocked off track, or are we committed to making progress? Then we have challenge, which is very much around our mindset. Are we our risk orientation? Do we like to get out of our comfort zone and challenge ourselves or not? Are we comfortable with that? And then learning orientation, which is around, do we have a kind of growth mindset, which is what Carol Dweck might talk about, or do we have a kind of fixed mindset? And then lastly, confidence, which has got 2 subscales to it. Interpersonal confidence, the degree to which we feel we're happy to converse, stand our ground, have an opinion, perhaps be assertive when the time is right, but also confidence in our abilities. So very much mental toughness as a whole is really important. And yes, higher levels of mental toughness can help us, but if we don't marry that with emotional intelligence, it can be counterproductive. So when we assess someone on mental toughness, we do it on a score out of 10. And it isn't that we kind of, 8s, 9s, and 10s are best, because 8s, 9s, and 10s without self-awareness or emotional intelligence on how and when to apply them just sees you spinning your wheels. It's a bit like having a car with a massive engine, but then so much power it can't put it down and it just goes nowhere. So actually, it's really important that you blend that mental toughness with that kind of emotional intelligence. And also, just to finish up, I wanted to mention that, it's not that more mentally sensitive people, because we talk about mental sensitivity as well, rather than mental weakness. Mental sensitive people, it's not that they can't achieve things, they can. It's just that we say they're going to feel every bump in the road. So, it's a bit like, have you got some suspension on your car or not? And if you haven't, you're going to get still where you want to go, but you're going to feel every single judder and jolt. Whereas the more mentally tough person might be able to have that suspension that glides them over the bumps as well.
Nice. I'm liking the car analogies as well. That makes a lot of sense for it. That's really good. So that I'm assuming then that's the 4 C's model that you referred to in your preamble. Is that
yes, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. So the first C then, the control piece. I mean, again, I suppose all of these words they come with sort of pregnant with their own meanings, don't they? And
yes.
People have their own perceptions of these things, because you think about control, and of course, as human beings, we all need to have that feeling of a locus of control, as the psychologists would say. That gives us a sense of safety and security to be able to potentially try things and get outside of our comfort zones, which is such a necessary prerequisite for learning and for development and indeed for life, let's be honest. But
yeah.
Control is again one of those amazing terms where sometimes you can be, have a healthy amount of control. Other times it can blend over into something that's maybe a little unhealthy. When we talk about control, or you talk about control in this area, what looks like a good form of control?
I think there's 2 elements to that. One is because when we look at control, again, all these 4 C's have 2 subscales to them. So the first one around control is emotional control. And then you've got life control. So emotional control is, as it says on the tin, really, how we manage our emotions in any given situation. Are we able to manage them or not? And apply them appropriately to that situation? Or do we allow our emotions to take care of to overrule our things? So, if we look at, then something happens to us, an event, a feeling, an interaction, whatever it may be, and then there's our reaction to it or our response to it. The more we can extend the gap between the thing happening and our response, the better we've got over a choice of what's the most appropriate way to respond, as opposed to perhaps reacting more through emotions. So there's that element to that as well. And, someone who's got high levels of emotional control, that can be a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing. So if you're a leader or a middle manager and you've got high levels or very high levels of emotional control, the downside to that can be that people can't read you. They can't understand you. They don't know what you like, what you don't like. You're almost expressionless. And if people can't get a feeling that they can get a sense of reading you, that's not going to help you engender warmth and leadership and all the rest of it. So you need to be able to show the appropriate level of emotion to the circumstances. And then the life control bit that you've talked about, and that's been really challenged with the pandemic. We live in a world where we have an illusion of control, and as human beings, when we don't feel that we have some control of our lives and what's going on, and we can't explain, predict, or understand the future with some degree of certainty, that challenges us, and that increases our stress response because we feel out of control. So what the hallmarks are of the more mentally strong person is that they will look and focus on the things that we can control. So we talk about the 3 circles. You've got the things we can control, which really actually come down to 2 things: our mindset and our actions. We don't actually even control our thoughts. We all have random thoughts pop into our head. If I tell your listeners, I do not want you to imagine a pink elephant with blue spots. Most of them have probably got a mental image of a pink elephant with blue spots. So it's very difficult to control thoughts all the time. You can control your mindset, and then of course we can control our behaviors. And then outside of that, there are things we can influence. So today, we can't control whether the internet's going to work or not, but we can hopefully influence it by turning off other things. And then there are things beyond that we have no control over, like is anyone actually listening, or how long they'll listen for. So we need to focus on the things that we can control, and then we can extend the impact of the things we can influence. And outside of that, then we just have to let go of worrying about what we have no control or influence over.
That is profoundly valuable. That's such a useful insight in itself, and certainly referring that back to the world that I'm in, and obviously I know about Sandler. You've been a Sandler trained person in the past, and
I have indeed.
We talk about managing ourselves on our behaviors, not trying to manage ourselves on our end results, because the behaviors are the things that are within our control. So there's a lot of read across there, which you did warn me there'd be quite a bit of read across between our worlds. So that's interesting.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Now I'm struck by the fact that you used a metaphor, or you used a repeating metaphor of the car side of things, because when I was reading your latest book, this Mental Toughness Metaphors, it's even there in the clues in the title, really, isn't it?
It is indeed.
You've used basically almost like a framework which is based on the sort of thing that you would get with sort of traditional fables, like Aesop's fables. And I went through this very, very quickly because it's deliberately, I guess, written in such a way that they're short little vignettes, little stories which get you thinking, and also because they're done in that metaphorical sense, you could share them with people almost of any age group. Tell us a little bit of the thinking behind that, and what it was caused you to write it and write it in that way.
I came across a brilliant book by a guy called Nick Owen, who's written books on metaphors for storytellers and trainers as well. I was looking for ways to be able to, liven up my training and make it more impactful. And he'd written a much, much thicker book with really useful insights and stories all around spiral dynamics to the stories that he shared. And that kind of got me thinking, because some of the stories he used in his book, I thought, I could apply that to mental toughness. And I just got fascinated by the power of stories and started to read more into those and think about using them, and then use them with good feedback. So I just thought, well, why not create a small selection of stories for mental toughness? I also then thought about, people don't have a lot of time to read a thick book. Nick's was brilliant, but it's quite, it takes a long time to get through. So I thought, well, let's do a collection of short stories that people can read and map it to. So there's a brief introduction about the 4 C's model of mental toughness that I've just gone through in the first chapter, not very long at all. But then map that to the 4 C's for each of the stories. So the main characters, what are the things that they demonstrated, and then pose some reflective questions for people to think about, because it's not the stories themselves that are important, it's the connections that go on inside our mind between our lived experiences, our world. That's where the real benefit comes from. So I tried out a few stories, got some great feedback from some people, and then just put them in a nice sort of short, as you said, fairly slim, easy to read book.
And it works really, really well. I'm not just saying that because you're on here. I mean, it really does work. It's one of those things where I was thinking, I almost kind of wish I'd had this when my own offspring was younger than they are today. Because actually, when they were still living at home, this would have been a terrific thing to maybe spend a bit of time just maybe give one a night or something like that, just as a bit of a bedtime story, and setting the scene almost to kind of help them to think within their own minds and really kind of develop some of these core, I suppose, techniques, but also more importantly behaviors and attitudes. It's really powerful stuff.
Oh, thank you. I've been really lucky. I've had lots of great feedback, and some parents are using it exactly as you described. I've had a few say that they've read one a night over the dinner table, and actually they've had the best conversations they've had as a family for a while, and it's kept them all around the dinner table for longer and talking about things. So that that kind of melts my heart when I hear that. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, and I can see how that would work, and I must admit there were a couple of them that also made me laugh out loud as well, which I really like. Which I don't want to give away any punchlines or anything like that, but the God and the Farmer one I really like.
Yes, yes, you can just imagine some kind of grizzled Yorkshire farmer, can't you, saying his response to that one. Yeah, I do love that one. Yeah.
If anybody out there wants to know what the punchline actually is, so we're not just talking entirely cryptically, the book is available on Amazon, I believe. So
it is, and if anyone wants 3 free chapters, they can connect with me on LinkedIn or drop me an email at the end, and I'll send them 3 free chapters if they want.
Excellent, nice one. That's very cool. Talking of great content,
yes.
Wow, that's some serious content there. I mean, I've got to ask. I mean, you've had some seriously good guests on there. I mean, the 3 that I've listened to so far, the first 3 that you put out as a sort of en masse to start with. I know you're doing them weekly thereafter, but
yes,
they were all great. I mean, the second guest you had on, Penny Mallory. Oh my goodness me, fabulous, absolutely. But they all were. But tell me, what have been your biggest takeaways? Who've been, I don't want to make you pick a favorite guest, but what have been your biggest takeaways? What learns have you had out of all the people you've been privileged to talk to?
I think there's a number. I think there's certainly different things from each one. But if I was to look at them as a collective, it's sometimes realizing that, I think sometimes we can look at what we might deem to be really successful people. I've had a Rugby World Cup winner, I've had a world boxing champion, Penny Mallory, several other fantastic people. You kind of think, wow, there's something they've got that I haven't. And actually there really isn't. They're all people, they all talk about some of their insecurities and their fears and their doubts and their failures. And that's brilliant, because that's kind of why I wanted to do the podcast, was to help people realize that, we've all gone through a really difficult 12 months or more, and life in itself is challenging, but, no one person has the answers. We can learn lots from other people, and we're all just trying to do the best that we can. And that applies to, some of the famous high achieving people that we might read and hear about. But they've got their insecurities, they've got their fears, they've got their failures, and they've been very generous in their time, but also being, willing to talk about that. Penny talks about, actually she realised that what she was doing, what was driving her, was to gain her dad's attention. And I think that's incredibly inspiring and humble for someone to come on and admit that, something like that. So, and they've each got those kind of stories.
I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think that's probably that particular story. Plus, she was also very candid about some of the challenges she had in her life. Living on the streets and really, going from there to becoming like, basically an incredibly world-class rally driver. And some of the elements she was talking about around trust. Particularly, she was using the example of her co-driver that she had a same co-driver for 10 years, and absolute trust that you have to have in somebody, to the point where you almost you're able to finish their sentences. You think the way they think. You know exactly what's going through their head, and developing those kinds of relationships. Really, it struck me that actually a core part of that is the willingness to kind of put yourself in somebody else's hands. You have to have that vulnerability, and that seemed to shine through from the stuff she was saying. I'm sort of a big believer in this idea that actually vulnerability is actually a strength.
Massively.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to mental toughness. We talked about earlier on. We talked about mental toughness is about being comfortable in your own skin. So I think people that got that mental toughness, that have that security, are willing to say, I'm broken, I don't have the answers, I need some support, some help. It's not about, oh, I can tough it out and I don't need people and I'm on my own. You know, it's not about that.
Yeah, I mean, because I suppose the opposite to that is those people who say, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, and suddenly becomes very painfully apparent that they haven't. And you know, go through this kind of thing of, like you say, toughing it out.
Yes.
You know, even at a fairly sort of basic day-to-day level, actually, I suppose the whole desire for personal growth, the whole desire to just learn from stuff. If you're able to kind of learn from your failures and not see them as the opposite of success, actually see them as a necessary step on the road towards success, then actually, you know, you're able to advance a lot more quickly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the challenge mindset, you know, one of those is around learning orientation. And that is exactly what you said. It's how we frame failure. Do we see it as, you know, something that's catastrophic and permanent and says something about us, or do we see it as something that's temporary and that we can come past? There's a great story about, most people know the one about Edison, you know, and his light bulbs and trying again. But what they don't possibly know is that at one point he had a massive fire that burnt down his entire lab. And as it is literally burning, he said to his son, go and get your mum. She's never going to see a fire like this again, because there were so many chemicals in his factory. It was turning the flames green and all sorts of amazing colors. Now, hang on a minute. There's a man whose life's work is burning down in front of his eyes, but he's saying, come and have a look at this. You'll never see this again. So he's looking for the opportunity in every failure. And then the next day he set about going, well, I've got an opportunity now. I can rebuild my lab even better than it was. And that's just a brilliant example of good high level of mental toughness for sure.
Wow. I mean, that guy's glass wasn't half full. It was like, you know, not only have I got a half full one, but I've got another 3 pints lined up on the bar. That's
absolutely
that's impressive. I'm liking that.
Yeah. I don't think I'm not there yet.
I didn't know that story.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we can all reply to that. Nice. I like that story. That's a totally new one on me. I guess, again, we look at the kind of read across between our sort of two areas. And you know, you mentioned actually before we came on air, you were talking about the fact that actually there's some elements of what you do that talk to what we have in Sandler, which is IR theory, which is the split between, you know, our identity, our true sense of self-esteem and our core identity, and the roles that we perform. Because we all, in all of our lives, we all have so many roles. You know, it might be dad or mum or husband or wife or, you know, brother or sister or friend or whatever. You know, all of those different roles. Not to mention the job roles and professional roles that we play. And yet, you know, sometimes because of the nature of our upbringing and everything else, we tend to see that our performance within that role impacts fairly fundamentally on who we are and our sense of self. And that's not unusual. In fact, it's very common. So it strikes me from what you've just said there, there's a huge amount of read across between that and what we teach. Is that fair to say? I mean, you know both.
Absolutely.
So I've got to ask you.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. There's definitely a lot of read across between that. And I learned some things when I was doing Sandler that I thought, well, I can apply that into what I'm doing here. So I've learned a lot when I went through the Sandler program, which has been brilliant, and certainly talk about that. And I use IR theory. I've used that in several keynotes as well that I've delivered for organizations, because I think it's really important. And interesting, at that point you make there is picked up with a couple of my guests. So this week's guest at the minute, Steve Hill, the teacher who's done all sorts of amazing ultra marathons through places I can't even just pronounce. He talks about that and the importance of self-talk and self-esteem and where that can come from and how that can be impacted by our where we grow up and our parents and things. And also Monday's guest is a top psychologist called Dr. Fiona Beddoes-Jones. And we really talk there in that conversation about self-talk and where that can come from and how sometimes we can be so critical of ourselves in a way that we would never dream of being critical to other people about. But yeah, and how that can impact on our identity and what we feel we can achieve. Definitely. So, you know, I picked up on some other guests as well.
Fantastic. I'm sitting here thinking I kind of want to go and start listening to those now. So yeah, so Steve Hill, this is the guy who's been doing the ultra marathons. Now, I mean, I couldn't even do a half marathon, let alone a marathon. So an ultra marathon, what's that?
Well, crikey, he's done loads. I mean, he's done them. I can't read them all off. We haven't got time. Very quickly, he's done the Mount Everest Base Camp Marathon at Base Camp. That was his first marathon ever, by the way. He's done 230-kilometer trek unsupported through the Amazon jungle race in 7 days. He's done 230 kilometers across the Sahara. He's climbed Mount Elbrus. He's done Mont Blanc. He's done all sorts of, just phenomenal. His rap sheet, if you like, is just as long as my arm. And and every year he does. And he's a teacher, and he does it to inspire his kids because he wants them to believe that they can achieve anything and get out of their comfort zone. And he's got a new book coming out. Well, a new book. It's his first book, and it's literally called "What's Next, Sir?" Because that's what some of the kids say to him. Great, that's great, sir. What's next? And Ranulph Fiennes has done the forward for it, so I think it'll be. I've had a sneak preview, and it's good.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to listening to that one this weekend. So that's you've just basically painted the picture of what my Saturday looks like listening to that. Fantastic stuff.
Fantastic.
Anthony, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I did say before we started that our big problem was going to be able to keeping this down to half an hour.
Yes.
That's exactly what's happened, because we're very nearly getting to the top of our half an hour already, and it feels like and it's vanished again. So tell me, what are the sort of key ways that people can get hold of you? You've already mentioned LinkedIn, but what other ways can people get hold of you?
LinkedIn's the main one. I tend to spend an inordinate amount of time on there, probably more than I should. So you can find me on there, or you could go to my website, which is 359.com, and the 9 is a digit. So it's 359, which is a nod towards Roger Bannister, as you know. I'm breaking the 4-minute mile. Or you can look me up on Instagram, AntTaylor72, or the Mental Fitness Podcast is on Instagram as well. And the podcast is available wherever you get podcasts.
Absolutely flipping fantastic. Anthony, it's been an absolute pleasure. I just to sort of wrap up very briefly for everybody. Anthony is a terrifically nice human being, as you've just seen. He's also extremely generous with his time. If you reach out to him, I guarantee you will have a great conversation. There are also a number of other sort of avenues to reaching him, not least actually getting his books, because both of these are terrific reads. And I'm not just, I swear he hasn't given me a fiver to tell you that. They really are very, very good indeed.
Not least because there's a brilliant interview with you in the tips in the top one. Come on, Matthew, don't be shy, don't be too modest.
He interviews some very good people in that one, plus me. But yeah, no, it's a great read. It really is. So it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. Really, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your valuable time with us today, Anthony. I hope that's been of real value to everybody who's been watching and everybody who watches also on catch up. I can see that we've got a few people watching right now, and I know that a lot of people do watch on catch up as well. Next week, I'll be interviewing Carol Hickson, the author of the Mental Resilience Template, a new book that came out about a week ago, which is also a terrific read. So I look forward to interviewing Carol. In the meantime, have a great weekend. This has been Friday Live with me, Matthew Dashper-Hughes. Have a fantastic weekend and a great rest of the week. See you all soon.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, everyone. Take care.